Good morning, group. It's Wednesday, and I need to talk to you today about some of the material that you covered over the course of the last couple of days, and that is specifically the Northern Renaissance. Um, First off, on senior business, just as a way of a reminder, we will have the portal for the voting open for you, and you'll have three items in each of the categories, and hopefully we'll have that open tomorrow and Friday, so we'll have it wrapped up by the end of the week. So thank you for contributing and participating, and thank you to the class officers for organizing that. For today on the Northern Renaissance, I'd like to talk to you about how the Northern Renaissance basically took the ideas of the Italian and they made them much more um, powerful and practical and realistic. I shared a PowerPoint with you, and as I go over my discussion, you might want to look at that PowerPoint. Now, I'm not following the PowerPoint per se, but I'm hitting all the points of it. So, Mrs. Levengood might want to give you a moment here so she can pause the video and for you just to scan that, take a look at it, preview it, and then I can get into my discussion on it, and uh, hopefully you'll be able to understand much better what went on in the northern period of this historical movement, the Renaissance. Thank you. Okay, back with you again. The key to understanding the Northern Renaissance is that it took what the Southern Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, wanted to do, and it freed it up. It freed it up for a number of reasons. Just principally very practical is number one, it was nation states that were oftentimes where this was done, as opposed to Italy, which was still under the Pope, and being close to the Vatican and to Rome, it was often difficult to get out from under the power of the Pope and the Church itself. So just the geography is a really big deal, and it's another example how geography plays a vital role in the development and the progress of man. The other portion of it, in terms of not just nation states have different goals than religious organizations would. So they're going to have particularly certain economical and political goals. And then as a result of that, the different set of priorities, they're going to treat the rights of man and the power they're willing to give man much differently as a byproduct of having that different set of goals. So the first thing I'd like to do, I'd like to talk to you about this in about three parts. First off, religiously, then economically, and lastly, politically. So turn our attention to the religious element of this, is that the whole concept of humanism, which you know quite well, humanism really was born in the Northern Renaissance, by and large, and it really hit its stride there. So you have to understand, humanism, properly understood, was not a rejection of those things that were sacred, sacred being related to the church. And it wasn't solely by any ways just secular, secular being of man. It was a combination thereof. And so you're going to have people like particularly Sir Thomas More and Martin Luther, those two characters in particular, the latter being the father of the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther, that were deeply, deeply religious and immensely committed to their faith, but yet they still wanted reform. They saw they had a different vision for what religion was supposed to be and what it could do for man. So one of the key objectives of the humanists in the Northern Renaissance was to reform the church, not to throw it aside, but to make it better, to empower it in such a way that the common man would benefit. Let me grab a little coffee here this morning. It's rather early in the morning. So with that said, I'm just looking over some of my notes here to talk about this. You have to understand that church, particularly under authority of Pope, would only allow change to happen from within. They were the ones that were positioned to make change. And if you think about it for a moment, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense because the people in power have no reason to change. They're in power. So again, as I told you before, their goal is to protect their power, to insulate themselves, to make sure that those who criticize or those who want some of that power, they're not given access to it. So a top-down version of reform is rarely successful or productive. Rather, a bottom-up is much more. So you had people like Sir Thomas More, who wrote Utopia in the early 16th century, writing about a idealized perfect society. His utopia being that heaven on earth, if you would. He thought that man could reach this state, not just simply in heaven, but here on earth, that you could have reached something approximating what Christians would understand to be heaven. Whereas Martin Luther, being like the lowest rungs of the Catholic Church, an Augustinian monk from Wittenberg, this little bitty community in Germany, traditionally he would have no say, no place to criticize. But he saw the church as corrupt. He saw the practices that hurt the people. He wanted to institute very utilitarian means useful ways of making the church better. So again, this is a bottom-up movement for him. He saw the problems. He wasn't insulated. He had contact with the common people. He understood their needs. And as a result, the reforms he offered, so for instance, like removing indulgences that you'll study when you'll the Protestant Reformation early next week. His concept was to take the concerns of the people, look for ways to take the institution of the church and have it meet the needs of the people. So that bottom up was possible in the Northern Renaissance. So again, part number one, there are a long ways from Rome, and the tentacles of the Vatican can't reach out and snatch them or to suppress any type of criticism as they offered. So, and then just other things more practically, are number two, the economics, and number three, the political. So let's look at economics. Economically, these nation states, like under the French and the English kings, they were seeking a society where wealth was a big issue. To become more powerful, yes, you needed powerful armies. Yes, you needed powerful kings. But even over and above that, you needed money to fuel everything. You needed greater wealth. And to do this, particularly because you had this intense rivalry between the French and the British, which was already taking place at this point, they would try to outgrow each other. And so one, they went on voyages of discovery that we'll talk about later. They engaged in economic development and progress. They looked at ways to advance their science. So in many ways, the competition between the nation states would propel them forward in search of greater wealth. Well, it took people to create that greater wealth. In the process, you have this development, particularly in Britain, of the middle class. And that middle class, which is often the mercantile class, the traders, those engaged in commerce and retail, they drive change. And as they become wealthier, they want a greater say politically. But with that very different goal, the church, their goal wasn't simply greater wealth for everyone. Their goal was just greater wealth for themselves. So these kings and the money that they would invest in, like the Voyages of Discovery and in building cities and the infrastructure of cities, they ended up making people more powerful. Now, as people became, as I talked about, like the mercantile class, the commerce class in Britain in particular, they want more power. So what will happen is you'll have this huge struggle in places like England, starting as early as Magna Carta 1215, where the landed aristocracy at that time demanded greater rights from King John. You had a parliament, the representatives of the people, the equivalent of our Congress, demanding more rights. So their obedience, their loyalty, their service was hinged on, in exchange for this, we get greater power, we get greater rights. And so Parliament, the representatives of the people, you know, the 14th, 15th, 16th century would engage in these titanic struggles between the monarch and the representative people as to who would have the most power, who would have the final say on building laws, on constructing policies, on taxing issues. And of course, that struggle will fuel particularly democratic change, as evidenced by the rebellion of the colonies eventually against George III in that case. So our nation is a reflection of this struggle in the nation states for greater economic wealth and then hence greater political wealth. So to bring it back full circle, you can understand how all these issues we're talking about, particularly political and economic growth and rights that went with that, that was outside of the domain of the church. So back to the idea of the nation states. The nation states, therefore, allowed for a platform, for an environment in which people, particularly those who were talented, this whole idea of rising up, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, this idea of your power and your wealth being contingent upon your merit, upon your ability, this becomes a core overriding belief of these societies. So putting this all back together again real quickly, the idea of humanism became this powerful instrument fueled by people, like I said, like Erasmus and Sir Thomas More and Martin Luther. Later people like Calvin and Knox will demand greater reforms. The humanists really begin this process of making the church a better tool, a better institution for everyone. And then the economic and the political growth that will follow in the wake of the development of these nation states, particularly the British and the French, and the competition between them, and how you have coming out of that a greater demand for privileges and rights, and this whole idea begins to sort of incubate as to man having just by birth certain inalienable rights, as we refer to them, Thomas Jefferson. That becomes basically the platform from which reform and development and greater wealth and political rights will happen. Again, this is the Northern Renaissance where this happens. The Northern Renaissance, just to put it in perspective, is about 100 years later. It takes off about in the 1450s, certainly with scientific developments like Gutenberg. And that's another big change is, of course, nation states are going to want innovation, research and development. They're going to need change. And I have some charts for you, 3 charts on the PowerPoint, which show things like growth of GDP per capita, looking at the growth of cities, which I told you are always the incubator of progress. And then the last one is on agriculture developments, as you have a growing population who demands better food and more food, and you have better conditions in terms of health, all of which are outcomes of this. Look at those three charts and keep in mind, look at the Mediterranean societies like Italy and Spain, and then compare those to the northern countries. And you'll see in the northern countries in all three of those charts, the greatest growth, the greatest development, and hence more power and wealth for the middle class, the sort of emerging middle class, and the common people happens in the northern. And it wasn't just by chance, it's because of what we just spoke about. So there you go. There's a wrap up on the Northern Renaissance. I hope that clarified some things and gave you some understandings. Make sure that you check your notes against somebody, but you will need what I talked about here for the test. And as I close out, we're looking at a test on Monday now. We need to get in one more topic after you finish up this idea that you're currently on, this concept you're currently on. So Monday is a better place to do that. So with that said, I hope you have if I don't see you, I may not before maybe next Tuesday or so, I hope you finish up well on the unit and you have a good couple of days on the weekend. So best wishes, and we'll talk to you soon.